Hey everyone, welcome to another review episode of Waiting in the Sky with TJ Starman. Today's episode is actually going to be a double feature because I am covering not only the recent 2022 Firestarter, but also 1984's Firestarter starring Drew Barrymore. So I'm going to get into those in just a moment, but before I do, I want to remind you if you have been listening to the show and you've liked what you've heard, please take the time to like, review, rate, subscribe, follow, all of those fun things. It's going to help me out a lot. I really appreciate anyone who takes the time to do so. We are going to be having a new episode of the main show releasing this coming Thursday. That is May 19th. And in that episode, I'm going to be covering not only the Assassin's Creed series with Infernal Griffin, but also going to include a conversation with Richard about Heavyweights, the Disney movie currently streaming in Disney Plus, one of our favorites, and absolutely stoked to have that conversation with Richard. So it's a good episode coming out on Thursday. Make sure to check that out once it's posted. But without further ado, let me jump into today's episode. So Firestarter, if you're not familiar, is based on a Stephen King novel. So imagine that there is a movie based off a Stephen King novel. There's a million of them. And when I was debating what to cover for this episode and what to cover for the main episode this week as well, I reached out to Richard. I said, "Hey, Richard, do you have any thoughts about Stephen King movies?" And his response is something I agree with wholeheartedly. And he said, "They're hit or miss." And for the most part, that has been the case. I think a lot of people, especially the earlier movies based off his work, were just real easy cash grabs. There was a lot of value attached to Stephen King's name, and we're seeing that now too, not only with new entries, but also remakes. So like Doctor Sleep was a sequel um, based off of The Shining. So he wrote the novel Doctor Sleep as a sequel to The Shining, and so they made a new movie based off of Doctor Sleep after that. And then this case, Firestarter is actually a remake of an earlier movie. Like I said, 2022. The original came out in 1984. So I thought it'd be fun to jump into both of these. Full disclosure, I have not read the novel. I did briefly consider like listening to the audiobook for this episode as well, just to have that point of comparison as well. But it's a 14-hour audiobook, and I knew realistically I was going to have a hard time doing that, at least in time for this recording session. So fortunately, I'm not going to be including any details of the novel. I'm not going to be coming in with that background, but I am super excited to compare these two versions of the same story. And so the way I'm going to do this is I'm going to start off with 1984's version. That's the one I actually watched first. And then when I cover 2022, I want to point out some of the differences. And so this is going to be kind of framing as if I had seen the original one, prior to this week when the new one was released. If you are interested in watching these movies, I am going to be getting into spoilers. So if you're interested in watching these movies, they're both streaming now on Peacock, and Firestarter, the new one, is also in theaters at this time. So definitely check those out if you want, and then come back and listen to this review because I'm going to be spoiling both versions. If you don't care about the spoilers, then buckle in because we're going to be getting into it. All right. So I already mentioned the 1984 version of Firestarter stars a young Drew Barrymore. A lot of people know Drew Barrymore from, E.T. in her child acting days. And so this is a kind of a continuation of that in her childhood acting career. I have talked about child acting in the past on this podcast. And so I will just say both of these stories are built around a young child actor, and it's hard to get great performances out of kids. And in 1984, Drew Barrymore, she did her best, but is still coming across as a child that doesn't really know exactly what they're doing and the intricacies of being on screen. So, not the best acting from your lead, which is tough. It's always a hurdle that you have to face with this type of thing. But in the service of the story, sometimes it's worth taking that risk. And so this is basically the bones of the Firestarter story. So Andy McGee is the father of Charlie, who has the ability to conjure fire mentally. Um, and Andy has the ability to tell people what to do, like put a suggestion in their head. If you have seen the Umbrella Academy, it's kind of like I forget which number she is, but it's like they do it on that show. And his wife and the mother of Charlie also was given powers through experiments. So Andy and his wife met in this like experimental trial done by the Department of Scientific Investigations or something like that. I don't know if that's a real thing or not. Um, that's how they meet, and she has the ability to read thoughts, and they have a child together, Charlie, and she has the ability to create fire. So basically, they have mutant abilities, similar to the X-Men. And what happens is that they are now become targets of the department that had created them. They're very concerned about what they're going to do. They're starting to see the abilities that Charlie has, and they're seeing them as either a threat or a potential weapon. And so when they are then threatened by these people, the family goes on the run to try and save Charlie. Notably, the mother is killed, and so this is a father-daughter story in both incarnations. And so that's the bare bones of the story. In this 1984 version, I thought it was really interesting because they really start you off right off the bat and show Andy's powers because they hop into a cab and he's trying to get out of town quickly because they're on the run. And he tells this guy, like, I need you to take me to so and so. And he's like, nah, no way, I'm not doing that. And he's like, well, I'm going to hand you a $500 bill and you will. And he hands him a dollar, a dollar bill, and the guy looks at it and it turns into a $500 bill. Like in his mind, he now believes that he's just been handed a $500 bill, and he goes, "I ain't turning down no $500," and then drives off. And so they show you Andy's abilities. Then they get into a flashback of how he's given those abilities, meeting his wife, which was Heather Locklear. David Keith is playing Andy in this incarnation as well. Um, and I thought this was hilarious. I had to make a note here. The the mother character asks, like, when they're gonna get paid, like, they're being given instructions about this study and everything, and the guy gives an answer, and Andy goes, "I'm broke too," like, and somehow they connect over that, and so I wrote down, "I'm broke too" is a great pickup line, apparently, and so the rest of the people, like, they show this room and all these people that have just been injected with, like, this serum or whatever, and they're all, like, losing their mind, like eyes are falling out, like it's intense. But then these two are just tripping out, like reading in each other's minds, communicating telepathically, and things like that. It's just the weirdest sequence, but that's how they ultimately got these powers. Um, and so, more about the powers, we start seeing Andy using it, and he gets nosebleeds. So I thought that was interesting because obviously this predates Stranger Things, but Stranger Things is the same thing. When 11 uses her abilities, she gets nosebleeds as well. So I think it's just used to demonstrate the strain on your body when you're having to use powers like this. It gives you a little bit more context, and so. I should correct myself because at this point we're shown not only does does he have like telepathy and the ability to make people do things, but he can also like move objects. Like he has telekinesis abilities as well. Um, I think I really first noticed this when he's trying to use a payphone and he makes the payphone spit out the coins so that he can then reinsert them. So it's weird trying to follow the rules of their powers through both versions of this, to be honest. Um, there's one point where the whole thing is she's trying to get a grasp on her abilities, and she sees this like soldier or someone like that, and he's just being a total dick to his girlfriend who's pregnant, and he's trying to say, oh, it's not mine, and whatever, just being a total jerk. And Charlie gets really mad, and she sets this guy's shoes on fire. He starts running through this, I forget exactly where they are. I think maybe it's like a bus station or something like that. And he runs into the bathroom and like no hesitation jumps into the toilet and puts his feet out. And then the guy comes up and he's like, "All right, buddy, get out of here." And he's like, "You mind letting me put my feet out?" Like it made no sense at all. It's the weirdest interaction. Uh so they're now like we're seeing more flashbacks. They're telling the story through flashbacks in this version of the movie. And so one thing that's really weird is that Andy comes back home and the girls were home without him, and all of a sudden he like knows something's wrong, and he like he sees blood and he leads to the closet and he's like, "Please don't be in here." And he opens the closet and his wife falls on a she falls out on an ironing board out of the closet and she's dead. And it's super weird. That's how he finds her. And then he tracks down Charlie, and the people from this agency are trying to take her away again because they either want to use her as a weapon or they're trying to not let her destroy the world. It's one or the other. We're now introduced to Martin Sheen's character, who is like a leader or an executive for this branch of the government, a special agency, I guess. Um, Super weird in general. He has a lot more to do as this character in this movie than his counterpart does in the remake. And I agree more with the remake because he's not really doing anything. He kind of is shown to be like a frenetic person. Like I don't know, he's very even keel when we first meet him, but then towards the end he starts losing it. And he's just like super excited about the her abilities or whatever. And so now we're back in the present day and we are introduced to the best character in this whole movie, and that is Mr. Irv Manders, who is just a nice guy who was driving his truck around, and he picks up Andy and Charlie, and they give him fake names. I think it's Frank and Bobby. And then he invites them over for lunch. They meet his wife. They have lunch. Uh, all of a sudden, like he knows that Frank is not Andy's real name and, like, calls him out on it or something, and so then Andy confesses, like, "Oh, we're on the run. There's this special government agency that's after us." And Irv, like, rolls with it. He's like, "Okay, cool. Like, if they come to get you, I'm standing with you." And they do come to get him, and he grabs a gun, and he was serious. He's, like, quoting the law, saying they need a warrant to be on his property, all that type of thing. Super like Irv is the coolest dude in this entire movie, hands down, the best character in this 1984 version of the movie. And that the scene where they're found at Irv's house is very reminiscent to me. Well, this came first, but it reminded me of the sequence in X2, the X-Men movie, where Iceman and Pyro and Rogue are at Iceman's family's house, and like the little brother called the cops because they're on the run, and Pyro just starts like blowing up the cars and stuff. And that's exactly what Drew Barrymore does here. Charlie does, and she sets all these cars on fire and like burns this guy to death in front of everyone. And they shot Irv Manders, which was just ridiculous because and to be fair, he takes it like a champ. He gets shot in the arm and he's just like up and moving again shortly afterwards. So it's not too big of a deal at all. But they did shoot my boy, and I was not okay with it. Uh, and honestly, like there's not a whole lot more that happens beyond this point. It slows down significantly because they are on the run still, but now we're introduced to this character named Rainbird. And I thought it was like a code name for him because he's like a special agent or something. And that's how I read it at first. Turns out he is supposed to be a Native American character in the novel. Like he is written to be a Native American. He's played by some white dude in here, and so it didn't make any sense. But he's like has a bad eye or something. I don't know. Like it looked glazed over, but then sometimes it doesn't. I was super confused by this character in general. And what's worse about it is he is just super creepy. Like he agrees to help out the agency only if he gets to keep Charlie at the end of it. And I don't know if this is in the novel or anything, but like his reasoning is that He literally says, like, "She's so young and so beautiful, and she has the power of the gods inside her." Like, this dude is bad news and just mega creepy. Um, and I hate it. I hate it, hate it, hate it. So anyway, he goes and after the unsuccessful attempt to capture her at Irv's farmhouse, they're like, "Well, how are you gonna do it?" And the guy shows up with a sleeping dart. Like, obviously, that's how you do this. I don't understand how you are a government agency with like Secret Services abilities and stuff like that, and you don't think to like put the little girl to sleep so she can't set you on fire. So that's what he does. And I had this note because David Keith delivers this line as Andy, he runs over to Drew Barrymore, who just got put to sleep with a dart, and he goes, "Oh God, oh God, oh God, oh God, who shot my daughter?" And like yells it, and they're at this like cabin on the lake or whatever, and he's just like, "Who shot my daughter?" And then he just stays there and is like, I don't know what he's doing. He's not trying to help her. He's not trying to run away with her or anything like that. And then he just gets shot too. And it's like, what did you expect, dude? And they also there's a bunch of people now in like flame retardant suits. And it's like, okay, why did you also not send people with that on in your first attempt? But it's beside the point. It's absolutely crazy. Then they bring Charlie to a hotel. They bring them both to like a hotel, I guess, and they're doing their experiments and they're trying to get demonstrations on record and things like that. This is where Martin Sheen loses his shit. Like he finally sees Charlie like set something on fire and he loses it. Uh, and then somehow she just gets let out, and the creepy dude is trying to befriend her, it's so that he can fool her. Like, and this doesn't make him any less creepy. Like, he's posing as a housekeeper at the hotel and becoming a friend with her by visiting her daily and things like that, and trying to manipulate her for this group so that he can again ultimately just have her at the end. And really, this is the point where nothing happens. We see that Andy is they're trying to drug him to keep him from using his abilities. Well, he stops taking the pills, like he makes it look like he's taking it and then spits it out, which like you would think they would also have a way of telling if that was happening. Um, and so he ultimately uses his abilities to tell Martin Sheen to like let him out and like get him a helicopter, and then gets a message to Charlie, and then Charlie tells her friend, the creepy dude, Rainbird, and he is then camping out at these stables where they're meeting up, and ultimately he ends up shooting Andy in the neck. Andy made him jump off of the upper level of the stables and like breaks his legs. And then he gets burned. I'm pretty sure he gets burned by Drew Barrymore, because then she's just setting everything on fire after her dad dies and is just walking away. Like, it's very Carrie-esque at this point. And she ends up wandering back to Irv and his wife. And there was a comment earlier about how they had always wanted a daughter or something like that. And so it's like, it's kind of touching that she ultimately ends up with people who are going to care for her, even if they are very much aware of the trouble that she brings. So it's very interesting. It ends with her like looking up to the sky and she says, "I'm doing it, daddy." And then they show like the New York Times building or something. And so I guess like they're going to tell the news about what happened. And that's how it ends. I don't quite understand the movie, in my opinion. Like I said, the whole third act is super boring and nothing really happens. Um, Apparently, they did make a sequel of this movie, starring Connie from the Mighty Ducks, who was the only girl in the first movie, which is interesting. I did not have the time to watch that. I also really don't have the willpower to, if I'm being honest. So I'm not able to give any insight on the sequel, but maybe I will catch that later down the line. But yeah, so that's the 1984 movie. I think the most noteworthy thing about that is that Drew Barrymore is the star of it as a child. 2022, and this past weekend, as I'm recording this on May 14th, uh, saw the premiere of this new version of Firestarter, starring Zac Efron in the Andy McGee role. and let me also find the actress's name. Ryan Kira Armstrong as Charlie. And so I think they're definitely trying to roll with the King name and the recognizable face and abs of Zac Efron. Not that he shows his abs in this, but his abs are recognizable at this point. Um, and so I want to kind of touch on some of the similarities and differences here. A lot of it is very much the same. So I went over the bare bones storyline, and that is the same here as well. The mom ultimately ends up being killed, and the dad and Charlie are on the run from the government agency trying to take her, so that they can use her as a weapon. Under the guise of taking her to save the world from potential damage that she can create. So they add a little bit more information. This is significantly shorter. While the original was about 2 hours long, this one is only about an hour and a half. But they do add some interesting details that I noticed. So they start off with, I just have to say, this is like the most adorable baby ever at the beginning of this movie. And then the baby catches on fire because it was a dream. It was Zac Efron's dream. And then they go into the backstory of how he and his wife, at this point, there's no flashbacks in this one besides the flashbacks. The main story starts, I guess, with the mom still alive, whereas the original one started with the dad and Charlie on the run. This one starts with the mom still alive before they're on the run. So that's a notable difference here. We do see a flashback of the parents getting their abilities, but this is done in the opening intro sequence. I thought was a nice way to kind of pace things out and not really spend too much time on details that aren't the most important. But I thought this was cool because they painted them as college students that volunteered for this test, like to get money, as opposed to, just two people that are broke, as we saw in the original. And we're seeing interviews with them, and they both share that they did have some type of psychic ability to begin with. The mom refuses to talk about it, but Zac Efron's character talks about how he basically has had premonitions. So he saw his parents die before they died. Um, and so I thought that was interesting because we didn't get anything like that in the 1984 movie. And so they are still given some sort of serum or a compound. I think compound is how they phrase it here. And so I'm assuming that enhance their already given psychic abilities or added to them as opposed to just conjuring them up out of nowhere. And so that's another, different element to this one. And so we see them kind of living as a family here. We see Andy is making money off of his power, so I guess he is a life coach, is how he later describes it. I would see him more as like a hypnotist. Like if you wanted to, we're literally showing a woman who's trying to quit smoking, and she's going to him, and he, obviously just does his thing and tells her that she doesn't want cigarettes and that it tastes bad and that she feels healthier and better. And so I thought that was interesting as we can see that them trying to, make do and at least, make lemonade out of this situation and try and make some money. Um, we're also shown another difference that I think is kind of cool in theory, but in practice loses a little bit. And that's instead of the nosebleeds from using the power, Andy in this movie starts like bleeding through his eyes. It's not even necessarily crying like you would see in Casino Royale. But he it's just like blood coming from all of his eye socket. And it's cool because it adds like this like creepier horror element to it, right? Like it's so uncontrolled that it's coming out of his eyes and not even like a nosebleed, like something that we're at least more familiar with and is not as out of place and shocking. This is coming through his eyes, but unfortunately, I don't think they had the effects budget to really pull this off or the patience for it because it looks pretty bad at times. Sometimes it's a little better than others, but later in the movie, I noticed for sure it just looks terrible. The effect when they're doing that. Another element, we start to see Charlie at school. This is something I liked that they tried to show her. They try to do like a slice of life type of thing with the whole family as they're trying to exist in this world, and hide their abilities and just kind of make do. I like that idea. Where I think they falter here is that they got too tropey with it, and we see that Charlie is being bullied. Um, it just being bullied for quote unquote being weird, and it's by like this one kid in particular. Um, and I don't like this trope, and it's not, and it's something that I feel like maybe was written into a lot of Stephen King books. From knowing the story of it, like bullying is something that is obviously traumatic for kids and is something that is very intense. And so when he's telling horror stories about children, like it makes sense for bullying to be a part of it. I think it's so cliche at this point in 2022 on screen to see a kid being bullied and then ultimately like using their powers and lashing out. And so I don't like that trope. I don't think it's done very well in here. Like she doesn't hurt this kid, which is refreshing that we don't see her like lash out at a human child. But she goes to a bathroom and is like losing her mind, and this is probably one of the most like horrific scenes in the movie. Because we just start seeing like this like pulsating power and like it's getting hotter, and there's the one teacher that is trying to be nice to her is coming in to like check on her, and she's like being freaked out by the latch from the bathroom stall is jiggling back and forth, and you see just the heat pulsating. All of a sudden there's this explosion, and so this is another difference here. Whereas Drew Barrymore's version of Charlie just kind of conjured fire up, like made fire appear and things were on fire, and then the fire spread as it normally would. This version of Charlie is like it's like a combination of a flamethrower and a microwave. Like you're seeing this power emanate from her and like launch and being thrown, um, as opposed to just like popping up. And I couldn't tell you. Well, I can tell you. I do like the older original version better because it seems more unique and it seems I don't know. It seems less superhero-y, and I guess that's probably where I'm just tired of that at this point. At least it's unremarkable when it's not in a superhero movie where it feels like it fits. It doesn't really feel like it fits here. Um, and they have her use her powers a lot in a lot of different ways, and it just doesn't work for me the way that the flames just kind of in general did in the original. Not that it was like great by any means, but I liked those effects a little bit more. It felt more organic, in that 1984 movie. So we see the same type of like inciting incident happen here, and that's I didn't mention it earlier, but Charlie is like lets loose and she's lashing out a little bit and ends up setting like burning her mom's hands, and that ultimately like signals to this group like, oh, she's getting powerful, she's dangerous, we need to study her. And so the same way that it happened in the 1984 movie, it also happens here, although the damage to her hands is significant here. We actually see burns, whereas the last one, like the oven mitts caught on fire, and then her mom was just like, oh, it's fine. So and that's the inciting incident. We see now Martin Sheen's character is replaced with a woman who is, I forget her like character's name. It's Captain something. At one point, she tells Charlie later on that she can call her Cap, and it's like, why do you have a nickname based off of your rank? This is not the MCU. I don't know. That was super weird. Like you're not gonna tell a kid to tell you that. Like I'm sure your colleagues would naturally call you Cap, but it doesn't make sense for you to be like, "Oh, hello, little child. Like you can call me Cap." Uh, but anyway, she goes and finds this version of Rainbird, who is actually played by the Native American man, Native American actor, and this Rainbird not only is Native American, but he also is revealed to have powers of his own. It's a little ambiguous, or maybe I just didn't see it clearly enough, but I think he also has telekinetic abilities, similar to the mom and her telekinetic abilities. And so I think that's unique. That adds a little bit more to this character rather than just being some creepy guy who wants power or whatever, something worse with this little girl. Um, and so that's very unique. We see that the cap is now calling in this agent to go after this girl. And so we can see like Rainbird still has the same role where he is the main antagonist pursuing Andy and Charlie and trying to bring them in. So he ends up killing the mom again, and that's well, actually, I don't believe he actually kills the mom in the 1984 movie. I think he sat that out until after that was when he was brought in. So that's a different thing. This version, Rainbird is the one who specifically kills the mom. And the mom is given a lot more to do. We see more of their family life. And I appreciated that. It made it more of a character. Whereas in the original one, she was just kind of there for a couple of scenes and then is forgotten. Like she's referenced by Charlie and Andy in passing, but it really plays no significance. This it felt more like there was a character here, and so now they're on the run. That starts the whole sequence with Andy and Charlie are on the run. We see Charlie still doesn't have the ability to control her powers. She is trying to connect with an alley cat. A cat scratches her and she sets it on fire and has we see Andy telling her like, "Oh, you have to put it out of its misery. It's suffering." And we also learn that the powers are hereditary in this apparently. So Charlie not only has her own powers of creating fire, and she also apparently has the ability to read minds through her mom, and also has the push, I believe they refer to it as in this one, her father's ability to tell people what to do. And so we learn about that. We now see this version of Irv, who is much less of a cool guy, and is just kind of a guy. He's still an interesting character, but he's less of just the outstanding human being that 1984's Irv was. And this is where we see Andy do the similar trick that they did in the original one, where he instead of like creating a fake $500 bill, he hands Irv $100 or a dollar bill and tells him that it's $100 bill, and so he sees it. Using his powers, he believes that that is $100 bill. He still offers, to bring them over for lunch before taking them to where they'd like to go. And I thought it was interesting. Irv references Netflix. And another big difference here is rather than like his wife being up and ready to go with lunch when they all get back, we learn that this version of Irv, his wife Essie, is hooked up to life support machines in their home, recovering. Well, not recovering, but she's been in that state due to a car accident. And originally, Irv says, "Oh, like she was driving and turned left, and then someone wasn't looking and smashed into her, and they lost their son." Well, because because Charlie has those telekinetic abilities, she's able to communicate telepathically. That's I should say telepathically with Essie, and Essie tells her what really happened. In that is that Irv was driving all three of them and was responsible for the accident, or was in the accident that where they lost their son. And this is actually a touching moment because she says she also told me something else. She said that it wasn't she's wanted to tell you for 30 years it's not your fault. You've hated yourself all this time, but it's not your fault. And so this is actually a really touching moment in this movie that I appreciated, and is significantly different than what they did in the 1984 movie. However, we do see that uh, Irv has been drinking. He sees on the news that these are two people that are wanted, and he calls the police. He calls the sheriff's office down to investigate. Then he talks to Andy, learns this from Charlie, and decides, they're actually good people. I'm believing them that there are people after them. He goes out to tell the cops that, oh, it was all a mistake. I was dreaming and I really felt it was real. And then boom, all these cops get shot, and it's because Rainbird is just sniping them, and this is intense. Like you did not see this in the '84 movie, um, but Rainbird is coming, and he's obviously still trying to get them, and he's not able to because they get out again. This is where I really see the crying blood effect where it looks really bad from Zac Efron. Um, and they don't get away again. Sorry. I was thinking of the other one. In this one, they do not get away. That's notably different. because the agents show up and they all put in these special contact lenses that give them immunity from Andy's powers. So he can't tell them what to do. They take the two of them, they take Andy in. Andy is a distraction that allows Charlie to get away. So Charlie is then, trying to make it on her own. She's been told to never stop running, and Andy is just like accepting his fate. And they're trying to figure out how to get Charlie over there so that they can study her still. Well, apparently Rainbird uses his abilities to put an image in her head and make her think that her dad is calling her to this facility. She's running through. We see her use her dad's ability on some kids to take like their clothes and food and a bike, and then rides that bike over to this facility. At this point, we see that her dad is stuck. Like there's no way around it, and Cap is with her and says like, you can't tell me what to do because I have the contact lenses in. You can't burn us because if you burn me, you can't burn me because if you burn me, your dad's gonna get burned too. And at this point, Andy says, you have to do it. I'm so sorry to make you have to do this. And he uses his power to make Charlie set them on fire and to set the entire place on fire and starting with them. And this was a cool touch. I thought this was, a little bit harder. It shows the struggle that as a parent you would have, but you know that you have to put your child's safety above everything else. And so I thought this was really well done. And so in this one, she kills her father. Um, so immediately following this, she is exiting the room where her father was being kept, where the captain was, and we now believe that she is going to be captured by all of these people in these fireproof suits. And so she is using all of her power, trying to stop them and trying to hurt them and escape. But these suits are doing the trick, and they're not letting her powers affect them. And all of a sudden, we think she's about to be taken, and all of a sudden they are dropped one by one with gunfire. And it's revealed that Rainbird is now defending her, apparently, from the organization. And so he kills all of these people in the fireproof suits that were trying to take Charlie. And then he tosses his gun. And so, for a second, you're probably thinking like, oh, he is gonna take her and do his own thing or has his own plans or whatever. Maybe he tries to kill her and put an end to things. Who really knows at that point? But it's just for a split second there before he's putting the gun down. He then like submits essentially to Charlie. He's down on his knees and he is seemingly about to allow her to burn him to death. And she starts to use her abilities, and you start seeing the steam kind of rising off of Rainbird here. And all of a sudden, she then looks up into the mirror, sees what she's doing, remembers that her father asked her not to hurt anyone, and finally relents. And so she doesn't end up killing Rainbird and proceeds out of the facility. And so ultimately, Rainbird catches up with her. They are walking along the coast, and he carries her. And so in this version, apparently, she ends up with Rainbird. So there's a lot more depth to the Rainbird character in this version, where he has abilities as well. And so he has more involvement in this overarching storyline, which kind of makes sense. It adds a little bit more to the story in general. I think that between the two, I would prefer the newer movie, this 2022 release in general. However, I liked that Charlie ended up with Irv and his wife in the 1984 movie as opposed to with Rainbird here, because I still don't see enough to suggest that Rainbird is actually like a good person. And so you're still kind of left to wonder with how this is all going to resolve at the end. But uh, I think that neither of these movies is particularly strong, and I didn't really like them overall. On a scale of 1 to 5, I would probably give 1984's a 1.5, and I would give 2022's a 2 out of 5. So neither one is super great, but I do give a slight edge to 2022. I think the production, it's a little bit more um polished, which is not surprising because it's obviously a newer movie. I think there were good elements of the original movie. Um for example, I think that David Keith in his role as Andy in 1984, I think he came across more as a father, like that father-daughter relationship between him and Drew Barrymore was more believable than the father-daughter relationship between Zac Efron and Charlie in this new one here. But at the same time, like he was still really like erratic and just like strange in that depiction by David Keith. And so if this makes any sense, I almost feel like Zac Efron's character is more of a human being, but less of a father. Whereas David Keith's is just like this strange dude, but you buy into him as a father a little bit more. Not great performances in either of them really, in my opinion. I think Zac Efron tries here, but I think he really failed to capitalize on um, that relationship, the father-daughter relationship that is so critical to this story overall. So I think the biggest thing that goes against the 1984 movie is just how long it is for no real reason. So the 2022 one is a lot more concise and does add some more interesting elements to the story overall. So I think I liked it better for that. And I think maybe, if you were to combine certain elements of both movies, you could walk away with like a pretty decent movie here. Because I think the story, while it's not entirely unique, even amongst Stephen King's stories. I think that you can find a good story here and you can flesh it out to really make this something good. And I don't think either one of these really hit that target just yet, which is unfortunate. So I definitely would like to dig into the novel a little bit and see if that's something that is present in the novel and it just gets lost when they've adapted it to screen. But who knows? But that is my comparison and review of two versions of Firestarter. If I had to put a 5 out of 5 ranking, I would probably go with a 1.5 out of 5 for the 1984 version, and I will go with a 2 out of 5 for the 2022 version. Both not great, slight edge to 2022. Thank you so much for listening to this episode. Keep an eye out, like I said, for the main episode dropping on Thursday of this week. Do me a favor, hit like, rate, review, subscribe, all of that. And we'll see you next time for another review episode 1 week from today. Thanks.